Hi, Harvey Austin, 8th graders. Today we're going to be practicing reading for gist. Remember, the gist is that basic impression of what the author is talking about. Um, don't stress too much about vocabulary or comprehension issues on our first read through. We're just trying to get the basic impression, the gist. Then one of the things that good readers do is that they reread the text. So after we read through it one time for gist, you're going to be answering text-dependent questions. You will need to find text evidence. So that will require you to go back to the text and reread for those specific details. So one of the things that good, skillful readers do is they reread. You read that first time just to get that gist, just to get the basic impression of what the author's talking about. You go back a second time for specific details and textual evidence to come to a deeper understanding of the author's claims and how he or she develops them. Okay, so please follow along in Nearpod. At this point, you should have already started the Nearpod task. There was a poll for you to take where you choose which meal you would pick out of 4 different options, and we'll reflect on that later. And you should have the text in front of you and be following along while we begin Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma. Introduction. Before I began working on this book, I never gave much thought to where my food came from. I didn't spend much time worrying about what I should and shouldn't eat. Food came from the supermarket, and as long as it tasted good, I ate it. Until, that is, I had the chance to peer behind the curtain of the modern American food chain. This came in 1998. I was working on an article about genetically modified food created by changing plant DNA in the laboratory. My reporting took me to the Magic Valley in Idaho, where most of the French fries you've ever eaten begin their life as russet Burbank potatoes. There, I visited a farm like no farm I'd ever seen or imagined. It was 15,000 acres, divided into 135-acre crop circles. Each circle resembled the green face of a tremendous clock with a slowly rotating second hand. That sweeping second hand was the irrigation machine, a pipe more than 1,000 feet long that delivered a steady rain of water, fertilizer, and pesticide to the potato plants. The whole farm was managed from a bank of computer monitors in a control room. Sitting in that room, the farmer could, at the flick of a switch, douse his crops with water or whatever chemical he thought they needed. One of these chemicals was a pesticide called Monitor, used to control bugs. The chemical is so toxic to the nervous system that no one is allowed in the field for 5 days after it is sprayed. Even if the irrigation machine breaks during that time, farmers won't send a worker out to fix it because the chemical is so dangerous. They'd rather let that whole 135 acres crop of potatoes dry up and die. That wasn't all. During the growing season, some pesticides get inside the potato plant so that they will kill any bug that takes a bite. But these pesticides mean people can't eat the potatoes while they're growing either. After the harvest, the potatoes are stored for 6 months in a gigantic shed. Here, the chemicals gradually fade until the potatoes are safe to eat. Only then can they be turned into French fries. That's how we grow potatoes? I had no idea. Okay, here we go to the next section. The section title is A Burger with Your Fries. Here we go. A few years later, while working on another story, I found myself driving down Interstate 5, the big highway that runs between San Francisco and Los Angeles. I was on my way to visit a farmer in California's Central Valley. It was one of those gorgeous autumn days when the hills of California are gold. Out of nowhere, a really nasty smell assaulted my nostrils, the stench of a gas station restroom sorely in need of attention. But I could see nothing that might explain the smell. All around me were the same blue skies and golden hills. Okay, we're continuing on to page 3. And then, very suddenly, The golden hills turned jet black on both sides of the highway, black with tens of thousands of cattle crowded onto a carpet of manure that stretched as far as the eye could see. I was driving through a feedlot with tens of thousands of animals bellying up to a concrete trough that ran along the side of the highway for what seemed like miles. Behind them rose two vast pyramids, one yellow, the other black, a pile of corn and a pile of manure. The cattle, I realized, were spending their days transforming the stuff of one pile into the stuff of the other. This is where our meat comes from? I had no idea. Suddenly, that happy meal of hamburger and fries looked a lot less happy. Between the feedlot and the potato farm, I realized just how little I knew about the way our food is produced. The picture in my head of small family farms with white picket fences and red barns and happy animals on green pastures was seriously out of date. Another section, the Omnivore's Dilemma. We're towards the bottom of page 3. Now I had a big problem. I went from never thinking about where my food came from to thinking about it all the time. I started worrying about what I should and shouldn't eat. Just because food was in the supermarket, did that mean it was good to eat? The more I studied and read about food, the more I realized I was suffering from a form of the omnivore's dilemma. This is a big name for a very old problem. Human beings are omnivores. That means we eat plants, meat, mushrooms, just about anything. But because we are omnivores, we have very little built-in instinct that tells us which foods are good for us and which aren't. That's the dilemma. We can eat anything, but how do we know what to eat? The omnivore's dilemma has been around a long time, but today we have a very modern form of this dilemma. We have 1,000 choices of food in our supermarket, but we don't really know where our food comes from. As I discovered, just finding out how our potatoes are grown might scare you off from French fries for the rest of your life. In the past, people knew about food because they grew it or hunted it themselves. They learned about food from their parents and grandparents. They cooked and ate the same foods people in their part of the world had always eaten. Modern Americans don't have strong food traditions. Instead, we have dozens of different experts who give us lots of different advice about what to eat and what not to eat. It's one thing to be crazy about food because you like to eat, but I found I was going crazy from worrying about food. So I set out to try to solve the modern omnivore's dilemma. I decided to become a food detective to find out where our food comes from and what exactly it is we are eating. My detective work became the book you now hold in your hands. Okay, so that's the end of our section that we're reading today. Those were the first 4 pages of our new book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Hopefully you were following along as I read to you. Now it's your turn. You're going to be answering some text-dependent questions on the next few slides of this Nearpod slideshow. And you're going to have to reread different sections of what we just read together. Because remember, good readers read once for just to get some basic impression of what the author is talking about. And then they go back and they reread for key details. Okay? You're going to have to cite those details in your answers. Good luck, and I'll see you later this week.